Hello coaches, thanks for joining me for another World Cup breakdown. Japan have made the headlines for being one of the top pressing teams in the tournament so far, but are they really a pressing team or do they rely more on mid-blocks and traps? We take a look at the difference and why the answer matters to coaches. Before we start, as always, please like, subscribe so you don't miss any more of the videos. Please also check out the new ebook on scanning below on the link. Okay, Japan and pressing, here we go. So when you look at the highlights and the breakdown of Japan versus Spain, brilliant game, two great teams, but it looked as if Japan were constantly in that high press causing Spain problems. Yes, they looked to do that, but when I rewatched the game, I was kind of taken back by the amount of time Spain spent in possession of the ball and spent higher up the pitch. That is also backed up by the FIFA data that they put out. We did a review on this a couple of episodes ago. Phases of play, out of possession. Japan spent, if you go down to the bottom, they spent 46% of their time in a low block and 29% of their time in a mid block and only 1% of their time in a high block and only 3% of their time in a high press. Now granted, it's very, very difficult to be in a continuous press against a team like Spain, but if we compare Germany's performance to Japan's performance defensively, it becomes really, really interesting. Here we see defensive actions for Germany against Spain, 101 forced turnovers in the top left corner, 52 times they regained possession. Let's compare that to Japan against Spain, only 85 forced turnovers and only 35 possession regains in the Spanish half. So why is this important for coaches? Well, I think it's really important because it matters how we define pressing, how we assess pressing, how we measure success of pressing. Now, can a team be a great pressing team if they only press for 3% of the game? Yes, they can. And I think that's what the next phase or the next step or the next evolution of pressing in the modern game is. Japan are an unbelievable pressing team. They just don't do it all game. They're adaptable in how they sit and be compact, and they also pick and choose their moments to go, and when they do go, they are very, very, very clinical and win games because of it. So from a coaching standpoint, I think this opens up the conversation between what are pressing triggers and what are pressing traps. Now, traditionally, we talk about pressing triggers as something that continuously goes throughout the whole game because we're taught pressing teams are true in their identity and go, go, go. If one goes, everyone goes. They stick to it. They do it full game. That's their identity. That's what they do. So these are some examples of traditional pressing triggers. If the opponent has their back to goal, if it's a 50-50 ball, if it's a negative pass, if it's a square pass, like I said, if one goes, we all go. These are all traditional pressing triggers that we have been taught in coach education and our experiences in the game that define pressing teams of when they go. The issue with all of these at the World Cup level and the elite level is that these moments happen hundreds of times in a game and some of them are subjective. So a back to goal, if an opponent has a back to goal, it might be a midfielder, it might be Eden Hazard, it might be someone twisting and turning out of trouble. If one goes and everyone goes, that actually could be a mistake from a defensive viewpoint. Negative passes are now being used to move defensive lines, so that might not be a good time to go as well. But another thing this opens up is if you act on every one of these here and you don't have possession of the ball for a lot of the game, you're going to be absolutely exhausted and the quality of your press is not going to be very high. So you're going to have to press for longer and you're probably going to get less out of the press in terms of being devastating in that transition than what you would be if it was planned. So traditional press and triggers, although they happen a lot, there's not a lot of detail in these and the output isn't very, very high because the opponent usually adapts really, really quickly. Now, where press and traps are different are that they're more specific. It can invite opponents into an area that you're looking for, but they're also high risk because you actually have to, again, almost set a trap. You have to be unstable in your defensive organization, or maybe you're letting the opponent dictate a certain situation in order for you to attack it. That's risk in itself because the opponents may adapt and solve it before you even get pressure there. It takes a collective reaction and it's a really high level of detail. Now, you can get more out of this here because you're doing it less, and it also can surprise the opposition. So whereas triggers happen all the time, constantly throughout the game, you don't necessarily get a lot from it per se, because again, they happen so often. Press and traps, if they're done really, really well, can actually win you the game. And that's what I thought the biggest difference was when you look at the data. Germany v Spain, Japan v Spain. Japan took advantage of those opportunities that were made from traps. So let's take a look at what a trap is and the risk involved in that as well. So with Spain dominating possession so high up the pitch, Japan had to spring their press and trap with a backwards pass going back to the goalkeeper, which is very difficult to do because your back line and your midfielders have more ground to cover. So ball goes back to the goalkeeper, and this was a good opportunity for the centre forward to press the goalkeeper. Japan attacking midfielders. They're in that 3-5-2 to jump on centre backs. Midfielders can get tight, but the big question is in wide areas, because when those wing backs step to full backs, when the Spanish full backs are low, they are leaving behind them Spain wide attackers who are in a 3v3 or sometimes a 4v4 situation with the Japan centre backs. So it's risk to leave them because Spain can break pressure like no one else in world football. And if they break pressure, you're defending against an overload with time and space for Spain to potentially win the game, because they were a goal up at that stage as well. But the fact that the Japan wing backs were so efficient with their pressing on the Spain full backs tells you, again, how well planned it is, their attitude to risk, their fitness levels, and also they only had to do it 2 or 3 times to be successful and win the game. So you learn different things in every World Cup. There's always tactical trends, there's takeaways. The quality of play so far in the World Cup has been unbelievable. Now, as you get to the knockout stages, better teams playing against better teams, less preparation time per se, but they're getting more data on teams. It's going to be really, really interesting to see what teams do. Croatia do against Japan. Very, very difficult to play against a team that's a high-pressing team, but don't do it a lot and are very, very effective when they do it. So as a Croatian coach, you're going to have to look at that and say, all right, well, this team is comfortable sitting in a mid to low block for long periods of time. This team is comfortable without possession of the ball. But if they press us, we're in big, big trouble. So how do you prepare to play against a team that you don't know when they're going to press you? And again, for long periods of the game, they're comfortable doing that. How do we learn from coaches? Well, I think it's challenging us to think about pressing. I think it's challenging us to think about pressing is not something that you have to do for 90 minutes, because with the game load and the intensity of the game, Japan players are very, very fit, but there's always limitations physically, and they don't have to worry about that as much as maybe other teams, pressing teams, do, because again, they're not doing it for long, long periods of time, so those levels of fatigue aren't built up. That's really interesting. I'm fascinated to see more of this here. I'm fascinated to learn more about this here. Does this become a trend? Can we learn from teams and coaches on how to pick and choose those moments to go, but really go? Because when Japan go, they're really going. Those wing backs are pressing on Spain fullbacks 30 yards. They're not just stepping 5 yards. They're stepping 30 yards, and they're stepping and leaving players behind them. Really high level of risk. I would love to see it on the tactical camera, because it would be a great perspective for coach in terms of, all right, would you be prepared to do this in a World Cup knockout game? Thanks for joining us, coaches. Always enjoy jumping on here and chatting about tactics. If you want to read more, modernsoccercoach.com. If you want more session ideas, modernsoccercoach.com/shop. Check out the scanning book. There's also free ebooks on there as well. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Thank you.